The major issue of this campaign is the direct political, personal, and moral responsibility of Democratic Party leadership in the White House and in the Congress for this unprecedented calamity which has befallen us. The American people, the most generous on earth, who created the highest standard of living, are not going to accept the notion that we can only make a better world for others by moving backward ourselves. And those who believe we can have no business leading this nation.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the one and only, of course, Ronald Reagan, and joining us now, I'm very proud to say, Craig Shirley, New York Times bestselling author, Ronald Reagan scholar and historian, and author of The Last Act, or should I say Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan. We're also joined by Dr. Kiron Skinner, W. Glenn Campbell Research Fellow with the Hoover Institution and Director and Associate Professor at Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome to both of you. Craig, congratulations on the book. And this book focuses on, as the title would have you believe, the Last Act, the very end, the honoring of Ronald Reagan, and of course the trashing of Ronald Reagan, the rewriting of history, everything from the memorial service, the funerals, and what he went through in his life before that, to the liberal media and the defenders of Reagan as well.
Yes, yeah, Steve, I pick up the last 2 years in the White House, and then for the 16 years he and Mrs. Reagan were back in California. A lot of people don't realize is that there was a lot of living that went on in those 16 years, even before the Alzheimer's and for several years after the Alzheimer's. He built a presidential library. He was knighted. He met with Gorbachev 3 more times. He met with Thatcher. He gave important political speeches, not just in Los Angeles, but around the country. He traveled extensively. So, you know, he'd been active and busy his whole life. And even, you know, his last line in his diary when he was leaving the White House, he's 77 years old, and his last line was, "Then home to California, the start of our new life." I mean, if that's not the essence of optimism, I don't know what is.
Right. No, absolutely. And of course, what you know, the letter that he wrote to the American people, talking about going off and starting the sunset of his life. I mean, he knew he was ill, and he knew what was ahead of him. And I mean, that's something that that gets passed over and glossed over as well.
Yes, absolutely. You know, it's very interesting is that he was only told that day that he was suffering from Alzheimer's. Mrs. Reagan, of course, was very, very upset. Fred Ryan, who was his chief of staff, was there to help console things. The doctors were there. The first thing Reagan does is he's there at their home in Bel Air. He goes to a table, pulls out a piece of paper, and starts writing a letter. Fred says, "Mr. President, what are you doing?" He says, "Well, I guess I better tell the American people." His first thoughts were not of himself, but of the American people.
Yep,
and he wrote the letter, of course, that was heard around the world, one of the most famous presidential letters in history.
Absolutely. All right, now, Doctor, you and Craig have also had a lot to weigh in on when it comes to the O'Reilly book, Killing Reagan. And you say that he got a lot of it wrong. He claims that a lot of it is new and revealing, but in fact it's old stuff. Talk about what your objections, if you will, are to Bill O'Reilly's book.
I'd like to begin by thanking my colleague Craig Shirley, who approached Steve Hayward, Paul Kingor, and me to write this op-ed in the Washington Post because there were so many inaccuracies in the O'Reilly-Dugard book. As we delved deeper into the book, we were deeply concerned about the fact that Reagan is portrayed almost in the first line as being confused, that he's an empty suit reading talking points only. But among us, we've written 18 books on Ronald Reagan. Like Craig, some of mine co-authored books have been New York Times bestsellers. We've worked in the archives at the Reagan Library and elsewhere for decades. And this idea that Reagan did not do his own work was something that we felt motivated us immediately to respond. Because when you look at the end of the Cold War story, there was no one in the Reagan administration who had the vision that Reagan had, which was to end the Cold War peacefully on American terms.
Right,
Reagan had been talking about that for decades, and no one believed when he assumed office in 1981 that by the end of his presidency, within a year, the Berlin Wall would come down.
Absolutely. Craig, do you believe O'Reilly and company did this on purpose, and what's been their reaction?
Boy, Steve, that's something I've been wondering about. Karen and I have talked about that. I happen to believe he did it on purpose.
You do believe he did it on purpose?
Yes, I do.
Why? Why?
Because he wanted to sell books. He wanted to write something salacious and tawdry. He does represent the media establishment. Reagan was anti-establishment, so there may have been something cultural there as well, that he had some type of animus toward Reagan or his legacy or whatever. But the fact remains is that whatever his motivation is, he did it, and Kiron's right, is that there are all sorts of factual errors and mistakes.
Well, the definitive copy here, Last Act, The Final Years and Emerging Legacy of Ronald Reagan by Craig Shirley. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Doctor. Appreciate your time. Up next, more of the show. Don't go away.